course, there are lots of different views about what Brexit will mean for the UK, and I guess the simple answer is that we just don't know. There are quite a few risks and uncertainties. Now, I happen to believe that Brexit will in the end be very good for the UK, but I recognise that plenty of fellow economists don't take that view. And I think it'll be good for a variety of reasons. I think what will happen is that we will be able to set our own regulations and laws, and I hope that's going to lead to a phase of deregulation in the UK. I'm quite optimistic that we should be able to get some pretty good trade deal with the remaining EU, and also I'm optimistic that we will get a series of good trade deals around the world, including with the US, which may indeed come pretty soon. So all of that sounds good. What might go wrong? Well, obviously there are political risks all the way along, really. First of all, getting the process started, and ultimately getting it ratified as and when we've got some sort of negotiation concluded with the EU. Parliament has got to ratify that, both houses of Parliament, and it may well be that during the course of negotiations, which are limited to 2 years unless all EU members agree, and that'll be like trying to get them to agree on the meaning of the universe, virtually impossible. It's quite plausible that negotiations break down during that 2-year period. It may become obvious that we're simply going to get nowhere. Of course, with the clock ticking, that's dangerous. So that's a risk. There's a problem for UK consumers arising from the fact that the pound has fallen a long way, inflation's going to rise, that's going to squeeze their real incomes. So the question is, to what extent are they going to cut back on their consumption? There are worries about investment in the UK. Will British and overseas firms still feel confident about investing in the UK? And of course there are concerns about the city. Will firms decide to move large amounts of business and jobs from the City of London to other places like Frankfurt, Paris or Dublin? So there are quite a few risks, but my own view is that in not many years we'll look back and think, thank goodness we did this. The EU is a remarkable institution. It's been going now since 1957 under different names. And I suppose lots of people think that without the UK it will carry on much as before. Some people will even think it'll carry on better because they see the UK as a bit of an awkward member that's been holding things up. I take a very different view. To use a ghastly expression hanging over from the new Labour years, I think the EU is not fit for purpose. Indeed, I think I would say you have to ask yourself, what is the question to which the EU is the answer? Now, some people will say that question is to do with security and stability. Why have we not had war in Europe, they would argue, and it's something to do with the EU. I've never accepted that. I think why we've not had conflict in Europe is primarily to do with NATO, America and nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, the EU economic performance has been pretty poor, largely recently due to the euro. It continues to be poor. So I think actually there's a pretty good chance that the EU is headed for the rocks. In order to survive, it's got to sort out the euro crisis, and by sorting it out I mean ending the misery of southern countries like Italy and Greece, and trying to get some greater commonality between the northern countries led by Germany and the southern countries, such that they move broadly in step. I think that will require a move towards fiscal and political union, which I think is going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible. There are some major threats ahead. One is on the euro, that a country will leave the euro, and I think there's a pretty good chance that country could be Italy. And if that happens, then I think the euro is going to be in severe trouble, and if the euro falls, then I suspect that the whole EU project will fall apart. And of course there are political risks too, with elections in several European countries this year, which may lead to the election of a Eurosceptic Prime Minister or President. So my verdict, I don't think the EU is going to last. President Trump has already had actually quite an impact on the global economic outlook, simply as a result of his stated desire to increase infrastructure spending and cut taxes. And it's been widely assumed that what's going to happen now is a significant increase in the US budget deficit, if you like, a Keynesian expansion amounting to more than 2% of GDP. Now, when this happens, normally what occurs along with that is the increased chance of higher interest rates, and that's what we're seeing. We've already seen the Federal Reserve increase interest rates recently. It's going to do so again and again and again, and that's already led to increased bond yields. They're going to rise further, and a strengthening dollar. So you can see, I think, one clear strand under which the new presidency is already influencing the world economy and will continue to do so. Then there are a number of uncertainties. He's made some pretty powerful statements about trade policy, and it looks from the early days as though he's going to go through with at least some of the things that he's talked about. This is a big issue. I don't think that bringing in protectionist measures, that's to say trade protectionist measures, is going to help the American economy. I can see how politically President Trump might feel he's got to redeem the pledges he made to a large number of people who voted for him on the basis of those ideas. The danger all along, and I think this is really quite a serious danger, is that President Trump sets off a trade war. That America introduces some trade restrictions, China and other countries respond, then America responds again, and before we know where we are, we're in a race to the bottom. That's what happened in the 1930s, and it was absolutely disastrous. The dislocation and loss of efficiency brought about by the collapse in international trade in the 1930s was one of the reasons behind the Great Depression of that period. So there's one thing already underway which is marked, but as it were comparatively conventional, and you can assess it, and then there's a huge factor, a risk, and we don't know how far he's going to deliver on what he's said. The ultimate danger is that he's going to unleash Great Depression Mark II.